Hello, and thanks for tuning in to Town Meeting TV's coverage of primary elections 2026. My name is Debbie Ingram. This program is part of a series of candidate forums hosted by Town Meeting TV in advance of the primary election on Tuesday, August 11th of this year. These forums are made possible by Town Meeting TV's generous underwriting partners. You can find all our forums at cctv.org/primary or on our Town Meeting TV YouTube channel, where auto-generated captions are available. If you're tuning in on YouTube, you can also click the subscribe button to stay tuned into local democracy this entire election season. On tonight's program, we will hear from 3 candidates running for 2 seats as the Democratic Party nominees for state representative in Chittenden-21, which encompasses Winooski. Those candidates are Daisy Berbecco, an incumbent, Matt Guile, and Al Turcos. Thanks to each of you for coming tonight. Good to be with you. So we have prepared a list of questions for each of you, and you will have 90 seconds to answer each question. Rebuttals will only be allowed if a candidate is named directly, in which case the candidate will have 30 seconds to respond. And if you're tuning in live, we also welcome your questions at 802-862-3966. If you call in, we will do our best to prioritize your question, though we will screen calls to ensure that questions are not repeated. We ask that you share your name and the town you live in, and that your question be directed at all candidates, not just one in particular. So let's get started with our 1-minute opening statements. And I think we'll start with Al. So please tell us why you are running and what will be different for the constituents of Winooski if you are elected.
Yeah, I just want to confirm technically Daisy should go first because she's the incumbent.
No, it's okay.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Don't worry.
Okay. Sometimes I'm a real faller.
Okay.
My name is Al Turcos. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm running to represent Winooski as the state representative. I was born and raised here in Vermont, in Underhill in particular, so I'm a proud Chittenden County public school kid. I currently sit on Winooski City Council. I was appointed to City Council in October of last year and elected this year on town meeting day. And the main reason why I'm running and why I really want to be elected is because I think a lot of people say this, and we'll probably hear it a lot tonight, that I love our community. But I think for me, my background is mainly in national and federal politics, and everything from passing landmark legislation in New York to being a plaintiff in 2 multiple lawsuits, thank you. And so everything down to listening and hearing what Winooski residents need on a daily basis, everything from like our sidewalks to our protected bike lanes. And so I have navigated bureaucratic systems for a very long time. And so all of my experience for a decade plus has really led me to, I think, being here and wanting to run.
Great, thank you very much, Al. We'll move on to Matt Guile.
Yeah, I'm Matt Guile, he, him. Grew up in Colchester, and I've been in the librarian at the Winooski School District for the past 10 years, where I get to serve students from preschool all the way through 12th grade. And I've been really involved with the Winooski Education Association, our union, that whole time. I'm the former president, currently in the political action chair. And I've been involved in legislative action in that role around the redistricting bill, around some of the pension reforms, and also having our local advocate to have the sanctuary schools policy passed here in Winooski. And I'm also on the Planning Commission in Winooski, where I've been involved in spooling up some of our inclusionary zoning policies, which I think have been really important. But I think a lot of that work needs to happen at the state level. I really feel that there's so many intersecting issues and crises that are affecting Vermonters, and the only way that we can actually address them is with some real deep fundamental change.
Great, thank you very much, Matt. And now we'll move on to Daisy Berbecco.
Thanks for having us tonight. So I think that government should really be here to make people's lives easier. And over the past 4 years, I have been trying to do that through things like lowering prescription drug costs, strengthening our mental health care system, building pathways for internationally trained physicians, and getting universal primary care legislation off the wall and into a public hearing. those are all things that are incredibly important to Winooski voters, and I'm really proud of that work. It's important to note, though, I think that legislators are responsible for much more than just passing legislation. We are increasingly responsible for really protecting people from harmful federal actions, including illegal kidnappings, and also helping families navigate some of the complicated systems that really should be helping them. So bringing together people, the right people, to solve those problems is something that I love doing, and I'd like to continue doing to help Winooski.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, let's move on to our kind of substantive questions. The first one is about committee assignments. The legislature gets most of their work done in committees that focus on specific legislation, take testimony, and look to bring completed legislation to the full House floor. What committee do you think you would serve best, and why? So this time we'll start with Matt.
Yeah, I think I would be really interested in being on the General and Housing Committee. Again, being in Winooski, working in the school district, I've seen the impacts of the lack of housing on our students. We have several unhoused students. And being on the Planning Commission, I've seen that we do have levers locally, but it's limited to what we can do in order to really address the crisis without really having sort of state level investment and change. And the General and Housing Committee also oversees labor law, and I've been, again, really active in my local union, but I've also been active in advocating for Vermont NEA and getting some movement statewide. I've been involved in the Mayday Strong Coalition, which is a coalition of unions and social orgs that organized the Mayday rallies that happened this year in Williston and the previous year too, that marched on the ICE data facility, and has also been doing educational events, which we got to host at the Winooski School District. I got to show off my library at the People Summit and Solidarity School. I'm embedded in the labor movement, and that's really central to my politics. I'm currently endorsed by the Committee of Interns and Residents and VSEA. I spoke at the Support Staff United rally last Wednesday in support of our healthcare workers, and I'm scheduled to speak at the AFL-CIO convention in July. And again, I think empowering workers is something central to my politics. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Matt. All right, Daisy, we'll move to you.
Well, I have spent the last 4 years on House Healthcare. I'm now vice chair there, so I would hope to be back there again. Ultimately, of course, it's not my choice, but the reason that I like that committee is we've developed such a nice repertoire between, across party lines, and I think that's because we've really focused on, within healthcare, just making sure that we're gathering the right data, that we're working with the right stakeholders, the regulators, the administration, in order to really advance the topics that Winooski cares about. So I think I would hope to be reappointed there, but ultimately I'm going to go wherever I can do the best for Winooski.
Great, all right, thank you. And Al.
Healthcare is also on my list, as I have a breadth of experience working in healthcare, really the focus being in helping people and families build their families, so whether that's access to contraception care, IVF, IUI, and so I ran an abortion fund for years, which also works at the intersection of helping low-income people pay for their abortions when they're unable to, and to bridge that gap. So I have a very large amount of experience in insurance coverage, Medicaid coverage, working to repeal the Hyde Amendment, which bars federal funding from paying for abortions. And so navigating healthcare systems is something that I have supported many patients through and abortion seekers. And then also myself as a multiple sexual assault survivor, particularly after a quite brutal assault in 2017, navigating that system as a survivor, being illegally billed for my rape kit, being illegally billed for my rape kit, having to contact the Attorney General's office, getting a cease and desist from the hospital that was sending me that, navigating those systems. I have a very unique lived experience to serve on that committee. And the other committee that I would love to serve on would be House Judiciary, particularly because my experience being both inside of the civil legal system and the criminal legal system. I've talked to so many Winooski residents who have either been within the policing system or have sort of been on the outskirts of it. And I think that that's something that whether you are a perpetrator of harm and or you are the victim or a survivor of harm, having that lived experience can be incredibly helpful. But similar to Daisy, I think I given the intersectionality that I live in life, I think I could really do a lot of great work everywhere.
Great, thank you very much. All right, let's move on now to our next topic, which is the budget and federal funding. Now, Vermont relies on federal funds for roughly a third of our state budget. With the federal government pulling back on spending across multiple programs, that foundation is shakier than it has been in years. So how do you think Vermont should prepare for federal funding reductions? And when you have to make hard choices, what are your priorities? So Daisy, we'll start with you this time.
Oh my gosh, this is one of the most difficult issues that I've dealt with as a legislator. There are many difficult decisions we made around funding, especially around Medicaid, this last biennium especially. My priorities would be housing, education, and Medicaid. I think that we need to improve our efficiency with how we use our federal funds, first of all, as well as our state match dollars. We can't replace every federal dollar that we're going to lose, so we have to really face making some painful decisions and cuts. And we also have to minimize the harm and help our state agencies work in creative, new ways with our state nonprofit agencies. So I think the role of a state legislator today and tomorrow is so different than it was even just 2 years ago in terms of facilitating collaborative, creative relationships.
All right, thank you for that. So let us move on to Al. Same question.
Yeah, this is a great question, and I also echo the Medicaid front as someone who, again, has dedicated a lot of their career to folks on Medicaid, and I think that it's a wider swath than that. So I'm thinking Medicaid, food assistance, housing. Oh my God, this table and I are not friends. Housing vouchers, and programs that keep families from falling through the cracks, or I think sometimes they aren't cracks; they're massively wide gaps. And so, I think one of the things that I really strive for is coming from an advocacy background, the idea that we know that cuts will happen, but how can you hold on like hell to what you have and to really, really fight for what you have and to protect it and to, I always say this, a budget is a moral document. A budget is how you live and operationalize your values. It tells you what is most important to folks. And so I think that's a huge way. And then I think the other way, and I think that this will come up multiple times tonight, but is the idea of who do we protect and who do we serve in every single way, shape, and form? And I think a huge part of that comes from who are we taxing, where does the wealthy come into this, and how are we ensuring that everyone is taxed fairly and equitably?
Great. All right, thank you very much. And so Matt.
Yeah, I mean, we've already seen so many cuts from the feds on the, cutting the Vermont Asylum Assistance Program, vaccine access, and I think these are obviously really hard priorities to make, but I also feel that we can't concede too early to the Trump administration when they're threatening to revoke funds. And there are some principles that we can't concede on. We can't, concede on the issues of protecting our trans students or our migrant communities in fear of budget cuts. And we can't let the Trump administration sort of use that to roll over. I mean, it's a give a mouse a cookie situation. We've seen with the Trump administration, if you concede, they're not going to stop and they're going to keep on coming. So I think we need to be really thoughtful about what are the lines that we refuse to concede on, and when we do get cuts and when more come, we need to focus on the things that are that we can't take back in, hopefully in 2 years, right? Making sure that people have access to housing, right? If somebody doesn't have fuel assistance and they freeze in their home, that's not something that we can fix in 2 years. If a child goes hungry, that's a trauma that can't be addressed in 2 years. So I think we need to prioritize sort of the direct, immediate needs of Vermonters.
Okay. Well, thank you all for those very thoughtful answers. Let us turn to something that is high up on the priority list, I think, of many Vermonters, revenue and taxation. Vermont is facing increased costs across housing, education, healthcare, and human services, at the same time that federal funding is uncertain. Progressive lawmakers have pushed for new taxes on high earners and large asset transfers, while the governor and others have resisted new taxes and fees. Where do you come down on the debate around new taxes, and how do you think the state should raise the revenue it needs going forward? So let's see, I think we're at Al again.
I think so.
Yeah.
As I mentioned earlier, and again, I hope that this comes up multiple times, but I think that asking more of the people who have the most is a great way forward. And I think, honestly, most Vermonters do. I think also for those of us who think about equity and think about equality, whether it's second homes, whether it's, high income earners, and I mean like very high income earners, I think those things can be really important, and that can also help to, like, no pun intended, spread the wealth. And I think the question, right, is that when we're talking about taxes and who's paying what, et cetera, oftentimes the people who are burdened the most are the people who it impacts the most. So we're talking about working families, we're talking about renters. And I think it's important to note that no matter your documentation status, that like many people, if you are a working person, you are paying taxes. And so I think that's something that also deeply affects, those of us in, the community in Winooski. And so, yeah, I think it's really important, and I would hope to see more conversations and more work, and rather than, I think, a lot of, I don't know if optical allyship is the word, but I think just a lot more oomph behind the work of taxing the rich and the wealthiest in Vermont.
Okay. Let's move on to Matt.
Yeah, I'm a strong supporter of the Prosper Act, which was sponsored by our current Winooski rep, Chloe Tomlinson. That would create 2 new tax brackets starting at $250,000 and would create a new tax on net investment income. So that's earnings from from investments that you have. I also support a wealth tax, which I think it's important to distinguish that from the net investment tax. That would be a tax directly on wealth. That's not something that had been proposed last session. It's a more complicated type of tax, but it's something that I think is really important to actually tax the wealth directly of the people who have it, and those are ways that we can actually fund the things that we need to have affordable and thriving Vermont. And I really do feel that tax policy like that is the only way that we're going to be able to get there.
Okay, thank you. So Daisy, what do you think?
I am so ready to tax the rich. They just keep getting richer, and Winooski families are really stretched. And as a single mom of 2 and a renter, I understand that deeply. Last session, I was part of a group that put together a package of healthcare relief as a way to encourage passage of that wealth tax, the 500 brackets. I was passionately in support of that. However, it didn't pass. It would have, the amendment that we were working on that included a healthcare relief package would have used the proceeds from that wealth tax to expand Medicaid. It would have backfilled the loss of the premium tax credits and a couple other things. And it was sort of the carrot to sweeten the deal for some people who were reluctant to support that wealth tax. I think one thing to be cautious of if you're a voter is that there are a lot of people that on the trail right now saying that they are really excited about taxing the rich, but it's a whole different game when you're in that building and you've got other people, maybe they're people in your party, who knows, maybe it's going to be our leadership next year, who does not support a progressive tax system. So how are you going to work with people to give them a carrot, sweeten the deal, make it more appealing and palatable to a broader group of people to tax the rich? So it's going to take, again, a lot of collaboration and creativity.
Okay, thank you all for those answers. Let's move on then to another topic that our legislature here in Vermont is a citizen legislature. Our part-time legislature passed nearly 250 bills this biennium, covering everything from education reform and housing to data privacy, animal welfare, agricultural security, neurological rights, gender equity and corrections, immigration accountability, and environmental protection. So what would be the 2 issues that you feel most prepared to lead on? It doesn't have to be those particular things, it can be something else, of course. So Matt, let's begin with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as I said earlier, I've been embedded in the labor movement, and I think that's one place where I am ready to lead on. Again, passing the constitutional amendment, Prop 3, to really enshrine the right to organize in our Constitution, I think is really important. But there is more that we need to do to protect workers. So just cause employment, that was something that had been proposed in the Vermont PRO Act, I think last session, that had gotten removed, that I think is really important, so that Vermonters have the right to be told the reason why they're being terminated, which when there's not that requirement, it makes it really difficult to hold employers accountable for really meeting our equity requirements, right? So they don't need to tell you why they fired you, even if you believe it was because of your gender or your politics or your skin color. And then also, I've been working in education for a long time and have been involved in advocacy around education. I've been involved in budgeting, and again, as the president of the Winooski Education Association, I have a pretty good understanding of our incredibly complicated education funding system and school budgeting system.
Great. Okay, thank you. Daisy.
My two issues would be advancing universal health care and continuing to really lead mental health in Vermont. I have a lot of work already unfolding in those areas, and it's also important, I think, to continue to help Winooski residents navigate Medicaid, insurance, housing, and behavioral health. One skill I've developed, I think, is knowing when an issue needs policy versus just assistance navigating something. So I think having someone in a state rep seat that knows when an issue is one of those two that I want to champion versus knowing the system and knowing what other legislators champion their couple of issues, right? And how to bring them in the loop versus reaching out and elevating something to the level of a commissioner. So I think, in addition to really continuing to advance universal health care and mental health, I want to really continue to help constituents navigate some of the complexities and failures of our systems.
Okay, thank you. And Al.
I love this question. And I think for me, because I am someone who lives such an intersectional life, I also think of how, what two issues I would lead from an intersectional lens. And so the things that really come up for me are, again, reproductive rights, and then also crime victims. I think crime victims justice, survivor justice, and also policing accountability, which to me is all underneath sort of the same scope. When it comes to reproductive rights, as I mentioned, I ran an abortion fund. I fought to repeal the Hyde Amendment. I've helped people access care from a system that made it incredibly difficult, especially once we saw the overturn of Roe v. Wade. And Vermont is an incredible state, and I think has really made a lot of forward progression. However, we have yet to see if that legislation has actual teeth, because it hasn't been put to the test. Not that I'm saying that it should, but I think one of the things that should be really thoughtful around is like, these laws were put into place, but now the landscape is changing. One of the things I think about all the time is that the United States Postal Service is the largest abortion provider in the country. Vermont is a shield law, but it does not protect community abortion providers. That's something to really think about for people who, we love our community. And so then I think on the survivor justice and policing accountability side of it, I think about the fact that I helped pass a landmark piece of legislation in the New York State House. I founded the New York Police, the New York NYPD Survivor Support Group, who our efforts contributed to the DOJ investigation of the NYPD. And I personally, by filing a lawsuit, changed how sex crimes are investigated in the city of New York. And so I have a lot of experience navigating those bureaucratic systems, holding police accountable, and having a lot of creative and collaborative change in order to make that change happen.
Well, thank you all for those answers. Let us turn to a very hot topic in Vermont, education spending. Vermont student enrollment has been declining while per pupil spending continues to rise. What does a sustainable long-term solution for education funding actually look like, in your opinion? Daisy, let's start with you.
I think a sustainable solution looks like progress through regional collaboration, such as the efficiencies that the CSAs, the cooperative educational services areas would that were brought in under 955 would lend. I think it also looks like coordinated mental health supports, shared services, but preserving local flexibility. Winooski has shown that diversity is such a strength, and so we have to really allow our local leadership to advise us as state reps. They're really the experts. I can feel you sitting up taller, Matt. They're really the experts. But even when making state policy, I think that we can't, especially with a district like Winooski, lose that local voice and expertise that have gotten us to where we are with such outstanding students. So when it comes to making decisions around something as complex as education policy, I would continue to turn to our local experts like I have before, our school board and our superintendent and all of our other experts at Winooski.
Okay, thank you. Al, how would you answer that question?
Similarly, I have been really grateful to meet with our local school board president, Nicole Mace, and many of our other members of our school board, and I have those sustained and already existing relationships, which I think is really wonderful because I have two incredible kids who I love and adore, but they graduated quite a while ago, so they're not really in the school system now. But one of the things that I think is most important here is relying on the experts who are inside the building, who know what's happening, who are part of the staff and faculty and the superintendent's team. And then I think a huge problem, this is one of the most complex issues, I think, in Vermont right now, is that you have local communities who are controlling the spending while the state is responsible for raising the funding. And so no one really owns or no one is really accountable to the bottom line. And I think that that makes it very difficult. And it's sort of just like, not to be a millennial, but it reminds me of the Spider-Man meme of just like everyone is pointing fingers and no one really knows like who we're reporting to or what metrics of success look like. And so I think that that's something that really has to be thought through, and I think so this will probably come up again because I talk about it so often, but I think so often when people are making policy, they're maybe not thinking about implementation, and I think that's something that has to be really thoroughly thought through in this state, and I think across the country, is that we can make a policy that can dramatically change people's lives, but it's vital that we think about the implementation.
Okay. And Matt, what do you think?
Yeah, so I just want to start out by saying that the decline in our student enrollment, I don't feel is something that was inevitable, right? I think that's the result of housing policies. The projection a decade ago for Winooski School District student enrollment was we were supposed to have increased by about 20% by now, and it's held flat. Much of that has to do with lack of access to family-sized housing in Winooski and changes in our immigration system. And I think those are things that hopefully we can fix and address in the future. But it is the case that our student population has been declining. And much of the increase in the cost in our school budgets has been the rise in healthcare spending. And I also want to say that it's not apples to oranges when we look at per pupil spending in Vermont to other states, because we also include mental health services and social services within our school budgets, and those have also been one of the largest, a larger driver of the increase in our budgets. And there are no immediate ways to reduce our spending that are significant. If we're going to close a school and we have two schools that hold 300 kids and each one has 200, if we close one and move those kids over to the other, we now have to invest in capital expansion and renovation so that we can fit those 400 kids into a 300 kid school. And we've had underinvestment in our capital resources for our school construction for a very long time. So I don't think there are easy solutions, and I do think that there are the seesaws and there are administrative compromises we can make, but I do think that those decisions need to be made with the deep involvement of their communities, because especially in rural communities, their schools are really central and to their communities.
Okay, thank you. Yes, complicated issues. Let's actually skip ahead and turn to another complicated issue: healthcare costs. Vermont has some of the highest healthcare costs in the country. Vermont's hospitals are losing money as patient visits decline, putting rural and community medical centers under real financial strain. How do you think the tension between bringing costs down and keeping hospitals financially viable, and what else needs to be part of the solution? So I believe, Daisy, we're starting with you.
So I don't think that the long-term solution is asking hospitals to absorb more cuts, but I think it's, and that's not what we've been doing, but I think hospitals are important, but we've just really severely underfunded or underinvested in primary care and community health care. So hospitals are important, but our system that we've built is relying on them too much. So last year, we really set a different course with Act 68, or maybe that was 2 years ago. And that was the result of a lot of stakeholder input, and the Oliver Wyman report rested heavily on that. And it laid out a long-term strategy for transforming our healthcare system and moving primary care really into the community setting. The goal is to gradually move appropriate care out of the expensive hospital settings. And generally, we know that people have better health outcomes in a community setting as well. So that would look like investing in primary care, behavioral health, care coordination, and payment reforms that really reward keeping people healthy instead of just paying for more services and focusing on investing in a crisis system. So this year we built upon that work through S197, which advances primary care payment reform through directing more investment into community practices, strengthens the blueprint for health, creates a roadmap to transition care more safely into those community settings. It also is going to look at site-neutral payments, and so that people can receive the most appropriate care in a more cost-effective setting. I can keep going, but I know my time is up.
I'm afraid your time is up. That is the committee you're on, by. So yes. So Al, how would you answer this question?
Thank you. I think similarly to education, this is a complex issue. I think it's also a crisis in our state. And I think there's a real tension between affordability and hospital viability, which is also something that just came up. As someone who grew up in rural Vermont, I think so often about access to healthcare for those folks there, and having to really measure the balance of being, we in Winooski are much more urban, and I use that term lightly. But I think it's really the idea of we cannot keep asking Vermonters to absorb genuinely unsustainable costs. And so we have to be, the answer and the solution has to be incredibly systemic. One of my favorite terms ever in my advocacy and activism life is relentless incrementalism. And so the idea, and I think sometimes folks who aren't involved in policymaking or any sort of activism work sometimes think that this is an issue, we're going to pass this bill, all of our lives will be changed. Even with primary, universal care, it's it's going to happen tomorrow. I think many of us sitting at this table know that is sadly not the case. And so I think one of the reasons why I really want to run is because healthcare is so important to me, and because I have such incredible history and experience in having that collaborative process and being able to work across many party lines to move things forward that I think could be sometimes difficult for others, but I think it could be a great, fun time.
Okay, thank you. And Matt?
Yeah, I support the universal primary care bill. I think that addresses a really, really sort of fundamental underinvestment and gap in care in our state. But right now, the system that we have gives the state legislature really, really blunt tools for being able to control costs. And I feel that the only way that we are going to be able to sort of provide the care that all Vermonters need in a way that all Vermonters can afford is if we implement Act 48 and actually have universal health care coverage across our state. Right now, the system, if we're creating cuts to our hospitals, the hospital administration has to figure out ways to fill those gaps. And they're between a rock and a hard place, right? When they decided that they wanted to close the rural dialysis centers, that was a hard decision that they felt they needed to make. Now, public pressure, they reversed on that. But again, they were between a rock and a hard place, and that's not the way that these decisions should get made. They need to get made democratically. They need to be made in a transparent way by our state and our people all together in a very medically informed way. And I do feel that having universal health care is the only way we can achieve that.
Okay, thank you all so much for those. I think we're going to shift gears a little bit now, and we have a lightning round. So there are 5 questions, which we would like for you to answer yes or no, if you can, or at least spend less than 10 seconds on each one. Okay, so let's see where I think we're starting with Al this time, right? So, but then we'll just keep going round and round. Great. So the very first one is, should any private schools be funded with public dollars?
No.
No, public money for public schools.
Yep, no. No.
Right, okay. Do you support a wealth tax in Vermont to make up for federal tax cuts?
Yes.
Yes.
I absolutely support a wealth tax for Vermont.
Okay. Do you support building a new women's correctional facility?
No, we should be investing in community-based alternatives and not new carceral infrastructure.
No.
Yes, I do.
Okay. Do you support using state dollars to build a new UVM athletic complex?
Not when we have neighbors who are unhoused in schools that are underfunded. It's not the priority right now, so no.
No, I think we need to prioritize affordability of education for UVM students.
Yeah, I agree. That is not a priority.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And lastly, should Vermont move to a full-time legislature?
Maybe. I think my answer to this is I would like to see what the payment would be and the compensation for the legislators. And what I mean by that is I think right now our legislature is incredibly inaccessible to many people. So if we're going to ask people to be full-time, are they being paid a livable wage? Is there health care coverage? Is their family included in that? What does transportation and housing look like for people who have to travel from the Northeast Kingdom, Southern Vermont? So that's where I say maybe there are stipulations.
Okay.
Yes, taking unpaid leave during the legislative session will be a pretty significant financial burden on our family, but yeah, we were able to make it work. But yes, I feel like moving to a full-time legislature will increase access to this body to more Vermonters.
Okay.
It already is full-time. I mean, I already definitely work full-time. I do not get paid full-time. I think the length of our sessions has been naturally extending every year, and I think it's fine the way it is. We need to introduce fewer bills and be more directed and impactful, but I do think that as public servants, we should be getting paid the full time that we are serving our communities. Yes.
All right, thank you all for being cooperative with that lightning round. All right, let's go back to another important issue, housing. Vermont has made significant investments in housing over the past several years, loosened Act 250 regulations to encourage density, and pushed municipalities to allow more development. And yet, Chittenden County's rental vacancy rate was estimated at just 1.2% in 2024, well below the 5% that signals a healthy market. What would you do differently in the next session when looking to invest in housing? And I'm going to go back to Al and go that way again.
Great question, and as I said earlier today, myself and the mayor and other members of Winooski City Council toured the workforce housing that will be available starting in July. We're going to have folks moving in, so housing is incredibly important to me. And so I think particularly from a Winooski lens, it's the idea that we have a very low vacancy rate, as many people in Chittenden County does as a whole. And I think the idea of what are the needs of Winooski and how can we help to meet them, which is 3 and 4 bedroom housing. We're currently seeing that with the Armory project. I know sitting on City Council, I've learned so much, which has been very, very helpful in order to serve the local community. And then I think that the other thing is looking at where Act 250 reform has actually produced units and what we can learn from that. And I think really fixing and adapting, which I think sometimes what can happen in policy is people can just throw it away and say this didn't work, let's try something new, versus saying what worked here, what didn't work here. And so that was something that I would love to work on.
Okay, thank you. Matt.
Yeah, I would want the state legislature to approve the charter change that Winooski residents has passed and some other municipalities across the state have passed, ending no-cause eviction. I think we need rent stabilization, which again will make housing more secure for Vermonters. And again, on the Planning Commission, we've been involved in creating these priority housing incentives, which incentivizes developers for building multifamily units or sort of multi-bedroom units for larger families and affordable. But if we're waiting for private developers to fill that gap and build the affordable housing that we need, we're going to be waiting forever. We need real state-level investment in housing through Champlain Housing Trust, who's building the Armory. There's housing trusts across the state that are doing, that important work. But we can also fund and grow our Vermont Housing Authority. They have a move-in program that right now is only building about 20 homes a year, but funding the Vermont Housing Authority and expanding the programs that they have is one way that we can address that. And the other component of housing is the incredible cost of construction in Vermont, right? We have very few construction firms, which is driving up the costs, and incentivizing new unionized or worker-owned construction companies would also give us access to the AFL-CIO has this $7 billion housing investment trust, but they only invest in 100% union labor. So that's been inaccessible to us, and if we are able to incentivize that, that would become available to us.
Okay, and Daisy.
What Matt said. That's really wonderful. I think that, you know, not being a housing expert myself, the way that I have worked to support addressing our housing issues, which I experienced, like I mentioned, as a renter very deeply, I rely through committee members on the Housing and General Committee on them very closely to help keep me informed, because housing policy, like education policy, is incredibly complex and it is rapidly advancing in that committee. So trying to keep an eye on one bill as it's advancing when I'm up in healthcare leading on things is really challenging. So I agree with everything that Matt said. And what I would do differently is I would have more public check-ins with those people that I collaborate so closely with, both people from the Housing Finance Agency as well as my two, we call them buddies, on the Housing and General Committee, because they're who I really rely upon to check in and ask what is advancing and how are things looking, and then I can report that back to constituents in Winooski. So I would have more direct contact and availability with them for Winooski constituents.
Okay, thank you. Well, you have all answered specific questions very well, and unfortunately we're rapidly running out of time, so I want to give you your 30 seconds to make closing statements. Let's see, why don't we start with Matt?
Yeah. Again, I think there are all of these intersecting crises. Again, we've talked about housing, we've talked about healthcare, we've talked about education, and those are all things that impact each other. And I think the only way that we can address any of them is if we address all of them. And changing our tax code and actually taxing the rich, taxing wealth is something that is going to be central and vital to being able to make an affordable Vermont that people can make their lives in. Yeah, so thank you very much.
Okay, great, thank you, Matt. And Daisy.
I want to highlight that the job of a legislator isn't simply to vote yes or no for Winooski, it's really to solve problems. And sometimes that does mean passing legislation, but sometimes it means helping families navigate complicated systems. Other times it means bringing together municipalities, agencies, providers, and community organizations to protect Vermonters from what's happening at the federal level right now. So this job is very different these days, and I really look forward to a collaborative relationship with someone in this seat so that we can do that together in Winooski, and hopefully it's a complementary pair of us. So Winooski voters have a very hard decision on August 11th, but I hope that I will be one of their choices.
Great, thank you. And Al.
I think for me, I've been meeting with a lot of legislators, both currently and in the past, and I've been trying to learn from them as much as possible to be as prepared as I possibly can. I think also the thing that I'm really thinking about is that I have had extensive experience inside state houses and also at the federal and national level, introducing legislation, passing legislation, and then doing an immense amount of advocating and helping people navigate bureaucratic systems, predominantly victims and survivors of sexual assault. And so I love nothing more. Sometimes when people ask me why I'm running, I say because I love a bureaucratic system, mainly because when I was navigating them myself, I was alone, and I never want someone to be alone. And so the families of Winooski, I know I see them at the food shelf and things like that, and so helping them to navigate those systems and also to make it more accessible is one of the things that I'm most excited in, why I really want to be a state rep.
Okay, great. Well, I think Winooski voters do have difficult choices ahead of them, but it's been really wonderful talking to all three of you tonight. And so, folks at home, thank you for tuning in to Town Meeting TV's ongoing coverage of local candidates, budgets, and ballot items. You can find this and many more forums at cctv.org/primary or on our Town Meeting TV YouTube channel. Don't forget to cast your ballot on or before August 11th. And then tune in to Town Meeting TV's primary results recap show. I will be part of that. That'll be the following day in the afternoon on August 12th. And contact your local clerk to find out how to obtain a ballot and to register to vote. In Vermont, we have same-day registration, so you can register to vote on Election Day. Thank you for watching and sharing Town Meeting TV.